It wasn't just the heat or the dust that made the trail long. It was the silence. Long, wide-open stretches of silence that wrapped around a cowboy like a worn-out blanket, sometimes feeling like company, sometimes like a curse. The year was 1879, and somewhere between San Antonio and El Paso, a man named Eli Hartley leaned into the saddle, his hat pulled low over his brow, the leather creaking beneath him every time his horse shifted. The sun had been overhead for hours, but Eli hadn't said a word. Not to his horse, not to himself. That was just how these rides went. Most people think of cowboys in movies, six-shooters, brawls in saloons, galloping chases through canyons. But the truth? It was slower, much slower, and stranger, and quieter than you'd think. Cowboys weren't outlaws or gunfighters, not really. Most of the time, they were just dusty men trying to get a few hundred head of cattle from one side of Texas to the other without dying of thirst or losing half the herd of bandits, storms, or bad luck. Eli, like many cowboys of his time, had learned that the real enemy wasn't always a man with a gun. Sometimes it was bad beans. Sometimes it was a bad saddle sore. And sometimes it was just the thoughts that crept into your head when the desert went too still. Eli rode with a group of 5 others, though not all of them talked much. There was Silas, the trail boss, who had seen too much and said too little. He had a long scar running across the top of his hand. No one asked how he got it. Then there was Boone, the youngest of the group, barely 17 and already on his 3rd cattle drive. He liked to hum old songs when the sun dipped low. Next was Cal, who only joined to avoid the law back east. He never smiled. And then there was old Mert, gray-haired, missing half a toe, and rumored to have survived a rattlesnake bite with nothing but a pocket knife and chewing tobacco. Eli never asked if that was true. Some stories were better left untouched. They had been on the trail for 8 days already. 8 days of half-cooked beans, sour coffee, and dry beef so tough it could dull a knife. The days were brutally hot, the nights bone-cold. Their boots were worn out, their shirts stuck to their backs, and their tempers ran thin. But the cattle had to keep moving. They were headed to a railhead that promised money. Maybe not much, but enough to make the ride worth it. Enough, maybe, to buy something warm for winter, or to send home to a mother or a sister, or to disappear with. Each man had his own reasons for riding, but they didn't talk about that. They talked about things like the weather, or whether the beans were worse today than yesterday. They talked about how many head they'd lost since the last creek crossing. 2 had wandered off, 1 had broken a leg, and another had been taken by a mountain lion, or so Silas said. None of them went to check. The trail was hard on the horses, too. Eli's mare, Hazel, had developed a limp. Not enough to stop, not yet, but enough to slow them down. Enough to make Eli watch her with a worried eye every time they hit rough ground. He didn't say anything about it to Silas. If Hazel couldn't keep up, she might be left behind. And Eli wasn't ready for that. Not yet. At night, they circled the wagons and set up camp. One man always kept watch while the others slept in shifts. The prairie was quiet, but not safe. Bandits roamed these parts. Some worked in groups, others alone. They weren't always after cattle. Sometimes they just wanted horses, or supplies, or worse. That's why Silas never slept deeply. Even with the fire going, even with the stars overhead, the threat was always there. Quiet, waiting. Dinner was always the same. Beans from a tin if they had them. Dry biscuits. Jerky. Sometimes a bit of salt pork if it hadn't gone bad. Mert claimed he could tell the day meat turned rotten just by smelling the wind. Boone believed him. Kel didn't care. He chewed whatever was in front of him and spit out anything that crunched. Eli mostly ate in silence, the firelight flickering against his weathered face. He missed bread. Fresh bread. Hot from a stove. But that wasn't the kind of thing you thought about too long. Not if you wanted to get through the night. The real test of a cowboy wasn't how fast he could draw a pistol. It was how long he could go without complaining. How long he could sleep in the dirt and ride in the rain without letting it eat at him. The desert wore on a man, slowly like rust. And sometimes there was nothing to do but lean back against your saddle, look at the stars, and hope the coyotes stayed far enough away. One evening, just as the sun melted into the hills, they came across something strange. A fire. Small, low, burning too clean to be natural. It was up ahead, near the old cottonwood grove. Silas raised a hand, signaling everyone to stop. Eli squinted through the dusk. There were no voices, no movement, just that quiet little fire burning alone. That wasn't right. Someone's out there, Boone whispered. No kidding, Cal muttered. Silas didn't speak. He just dismounted slowly, his hand on the grip of his rifle. He motioned for the others to follow, quiet as dust. They moved in a slow line, careful not to spook their horses or the cattle. The fire crackled softly as they got closer. Still no sound, no footsteps, no shadows, just the smell of smoke and something else, burnt meat, maybe, or hide. When they reached the grove, they found the fire still burning. But no one was there. No pots, no bedrolls, just a single boot near the flames. It was old, scuffed, and torn at the heel. Inside was a piece of cloth, tied like a note, though no one touched it. Could be a trap, Silas muttered, his voice low. Or someone's warning, Mert added. No one slept easy that night. The fire in the grove stayed lit long after they rode away from it. And sometime around midnight, Hazel started pacing. Eli tried to calm her, whispering into her mane. But she kept shifting, her ears twitching, her breath uneasy. Something ain't right. Eli said aloud, though mostly to himself. He wasn't wrong. The next morning, one of the cattle was gone. Not wandered, gone. No tracks. No struggle. Just missing. The trail grew colder after that. Not just the wind, but the air itself. The kind of cold that settled in your chest. Like someone or something was watching. Silas wouldn't talk about it. Cal kept writing. Boone started humming less. Even Mert stayed quiet. Eli, for the first time in days, felt something he hadn't felt since his first ride out west. Fear. It wasn't loud. It wasn't screaming or chasing. It was quiet. Slow. Creeping. Like a fire burning low, waiting for someone to throw on more wood. But the trail didn't stop. The cattle still needed driving. The wind still blew. The sun still burned down. And the food? Still bad. By the 12th day, the beans had gone sour. Boone took one bite and spat it into the dirt. We're going to die of food poisoning before any bandit finds us, he said. Won't be that lucky, Cal replied. Mert cooked what he could. Salted meat. Old coffee grounds reused twice over. Nothing fresh. Nothing new. Just more of the same. That was the cowboy way, Eli guessed. Keep going. Even when the boots wear thin, even when the sky looks wrong, even when the trail ahead feels like it's turning into something you can't name. And as they rode further west, toward a canyon none of them had ever seen before, a low sound echoed through the air, like thunder, but slower. Like footsteps, heavy ones. Hazel stopped walking, and Eli looked up. What he saw next made him forget the hunger, the cold, and the pain in his back. But he didn't say a word. Not yet, because some things you can't explain with words. Not until you're sure you're still alive to tell it. Eli didn't blink at first. He wasn't sure he needed to. What he saw looked too far away to be real, like a shape someone half imagined during a dream. But it was there, just beyond the rise in the land, standing where the sky met the red canyon wall. A tall figure unmoving. No horse. No pack. Just a man. Or what seemed like one. Someone's up there, Eli said quietly. No one answered. The others were busy with the cattle, counting heads, adjusting their gear, or staring blankly into the dust. Eli glanced again. But this time, the figure was gone. Just the edge of the canyon, quiet and empty like always. Hazel didn't relax, though. She kept shifting her weight, pawing lightly at the earth. Eli rubbed her neck with a slow hand. It's all right, girl. Might have just been the sun, he muttered. Still, he didn't believe himself. That evening, they reached the canyon pass. It was narrow and steep, the kind of place that made you feel smaller than you were. Rocks towered on both sides, casting long shadows that swallowed the light before the sun even touched the ground. They had no choice but to go through. It was the only cut in the land wide enough to take the cattle. Silas led the group in slow. No one talked much. Even Boone stayed quiet, which wasn't like him. Somewhere in the middle of the canyon, the wind picked up. Not hard, but strange. Like it was whispering through cracks in the stone. Eli could swear he heard his own name carried in it, but he didn't turn around. That's how you spook yourself out here. You imagined something, gave it a shape, a voice, then turned around and made it real. Keep writing, Silas said, voice steady. They did. By nightfall, they were clear of the canyon and back on flat land. But the silence followed them, heavy as a saddlebag filled with rocks. They made camp without speaking. The fire was small that night. No one wanted to draw too much attention. Even Mert, who always claimed fires kept the night ghosts away, didn't argue when Silas kept it low. Boone finally broke the quiet as he stirred the pot. Y'all ever hear about the Canyon Riders? Cal raised a brow. Don't start with that again. No, I'm serious, Boone said. Pa used to tell me about him. Cowboys that rode through canyons like this one and never came out the other side. Or they did, but they weren't right no more. Said their eyes were wrong. Said they stopped talking, stopped eating. Like they left something of themselves back in the rocks. Your pa also believed chickens could predict the weather, Cal said flatly. Boone shrugged. Didn't mean he was wrong. Mert spoke up, voice rough as bark. I seen strange things in canyons before. Light where there wasn't none. Echoes that didn't belong to us. Silas didn't say anything. Just poked the fire and kept watch. Eli listened. He didn't want to believe any of it, but something still itched at the back of his neck. Something that hadn't gone away since that strange fire back at the grove. He pulled his coat tighter around him and leaned back against his saddle. The stars were out, but they looked dull. Not the bright ones he remembered from a few nights ago. These seemed further away, colder. He closed his eyes and tried to let the silence lull him. Not asleep, just into stillness. Around midnight, Hazel whinnied softly. Eli sat up fast. The fire was low. The others were sleeping, except Silas, who stood just beyond the ring of light, facing out into the dark. Eli walked over slowly. You see something? Silas didn't turn. Thought I did. Something moved. Might have been a coyote. Or a man. From that campfire? Silas didn't answer. The silence stretched. Then he finally said, whatever it was, wasn't making tracks. Eli felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. Out here, everything left tracks. Cattle, horses, men, even snakes dragging their bellies through the dirt. If there were no tracks, then maybe there hadn't been anything at all. Or maybe what was out there didn't want to be found. The next morning, the wind changed. Dry, bitter, smelled faintly of iron and old leather. Mert spit in the dirt. Storm's coming, not the weather kind. They moved out anyway. There wasn't much of a choice. The cattle were tired. Hazel limped harder now. Eli stayed close to her, refusing to ride hard. Silas didn't complain. He knew what a horse meant to a man out here. It wasn't just transportation. It was everything. Safety, direction, even comfort. As the sun climbed higher, a few vultures circled overhead. Not too strange, but they hovered longer than they should have, making tight, lazy loops above the herd. Eli counted 3, then 4, then 5. Boone noticed 2. They know something we don't. Maybe they're just hungry, Mert said. But no one laughed. Just before noon, Cal's horse stumbled. Threw him into the dust. When they checked its hoof, they found a sharp piece of metal buried deep. Not from the trail. Looked like a broken piece of a spur, rusted over and old. Too old. Couldn't have come from any of them. Cal tossed it aside. This land's cursed, he muttered. No one argued. They made camp early that night. There was no sense in pushing the cattle if the land itself didn't want them there. That was the kind of thinking that got men killed. You learned to listen to the signs, even if you didn't understand them. And tonight, everything felt off. The ground was too still, the air too dry, and that sound, low and steady, just on the edge of hearing, had returned. Like footsteps, but slower, deeper. Silas didn't light a fire. He just sat in the dark, cleaning his rifle. Eli stayed close to Hazel, running his hand along her neck, trying to calm her even as he felt his own nerves fray. Boone finally whispered, You think we'll make it to the railhead? Silas answered without looking up. That depends. On what? On who, or what, is following us. And then, as if summoned by those words, a new sound cracked through the silence. A sharp, high whistle from the canyon behind them. One long note, then nothing. Not a bird, not the wind, not a voice, just that whistle, and the dark waiting quietly around them. The night passed without sleep. No one said it, but it hung in the air, thick as smoke. Every rustle in the grass made hands twitch toward rifles. Even Boone, who could sleep through a thunderstorm, lay on his back staring at the stars, eyes wide open. When dawn broke, the sky was pale and still. No clouds, no birds. Even the vultures were gone. Eli stood slowly and checked Hazel. She hadn't eaten her grain. Her legs shook a little under her weight. He whispered gently to her and promised they'd rest soon, though he didn't believe it himself. The herd had started to spook. Not a stampede, but they shifted too much, kicked at shadows, and bunched together like they sensed something wasn't right. Animals always knew before people did. That's just the way it was. "Move him out," Silas finally said. His voice was hoarse from the cold night air, or maybe something else. Mert saddled up without a word. Cal tightened his belt and checked his boots. Boone dragged behind, face pale. Nobody asked how anyone slept. Nobody cared. They just moved forward, slowly, through the quiet morning. The trail curved around a set of dry hills where the earth cracked in wide, jagged veins. In spring, the grass might have hidden it all, but now it was barren. And it smelled, not like decay exactly, but something old, like dried blood, or rusted iron under the sun. As they crossed a shallow ravine, Eli's horse stopped cold. She wouldn't move. Her ears turned back and her muscles locked. "What is it?" Boone called, his voice shaky. Eli dismounted. "Don't know. Something's wrong here." He walked ahead, boots crunching on brittle grass, and then he saw it. Half buried under a crumbling ridge, bone. A cow's ribcage maybe, but too big. He kicked some dirt away. Then more bones. Human bones. Old and cracked by weather, but not scattered by animals like they should have been. Laid out. Placed. Silas came up behind him, looked once, and said nothing. They left it there. Some places weren't meant for stories. Just silence. By midday, the sun was heavy and mean. Their canteens were lighter than anyone wanted to admit. They hadn't found fresh water in over a day, and the last creek bed had been dry. Dust stuck to their skin, to their teeth. Even the cattle had grown sluggish, panting through parched mouths. "Rotten luck," Cal muttered. Boone wiped his face. "I'd trade my boots for a good apple." "I'd trade you for a good apple," Cal replied. Boone almost smiled. Almost. Later that day, they came across a trail marker. Just a split tree stump-tied with faded red cloth. Eli remembered Silas saying once that markers like that were left by riders long gone. Men who'd been through the trail before it was even mapped. Nobody knew who they were. Some folks thought they were old scouts. Others thought they were outlaws who left signs for each other. Either way, it wasn't comforting. Mert looked at it. Means were near the switchback. Silas nodded. The switchback was a narrow, dangerous cut in the land where the trail bent like a coiled snake, dropping down into a long canyon with only one way in or out. Most herds hated it. Too steep, too rocky. More than one steer had lost footing and tumbled into the rocks below. They started down just before sunset. Eli kept Hazel close, guiding her step by step. She moved slow but steady. Behind them, the cattle moved like a wave of heavy breath, grumbling, grunting, afraid but willing. They trusted the horses more than the men. Halfway down, Boone's horse reared suddenly, spooked by something neither Eli nor Silas could see. Boone fought to control it, but the animal slipped, scraping hooves across loose stone. Eli grabbed the reins from behind and steadied them both just in time. Boone's hand shook. "Did you see that?" "No," Eli said. "What was it?" Boone swallowed hard. "A shadow, standing just off the trail. Tall, still." Eli looked. There was nothing there, but the space felt wrong, like something had just moved. They pushed forward without speaking. When they reached the bottom, night had already started to set in. They found a narrow clearing between two ridges and set up camp there. The canyon walls blocked most of the wind, but the place felt colder than it should have, like it remembered something. That night, Eli dreamed of fire. Not the usual kind. This one danced high. Blue flames licking the sky, crackling without smoke, burning without heat. In the dream, men stood around it, silent, wearing long coats and dust-covered hats, faces hidden, watching. When he woke up, Silas was already awake, standing on the edge of camp, rifle in hand. Eli walked over. Couldn't sleep either. Silas didn't answer right away. Heard something. What kind of something? Silas finally looked at him. The kind you don't chase. That morning, one of the cows had wandered off during the night. Just gone. No broken fence rope. No tracks. Just missing. Mert checked the ground. Ain't possible, he muttered. Unless she grew wings, Boone said quietly. They searched for an hour. Nothing. The herd had started to thin out. Some cows looked sick, stomachs sunken, eyes dim, like they'd been eating something they shouldn't have, or drinking water that wasn't right. But there hadn't been any water. That afternoon, they reached the bottom edge of the canyon. Beyond it was the wide flat desert that led to the old trade road. If they could cross that stretch in 2 days, they'd be near the railhead. But standing between them and that stretch was something none of them had expected. An old fort, ruined, dead quiet. Its wooden beams had turned gray with age. The outer walls sagged inward like the place had exhaled its last breath years ago. The flagpoles stood bare, no cloth, just a jagged splinter at the top. And in the center, a single door stood half open. Boone stared at it. Wasn't on any map. Doesn't matter, Silas said. We're not staying. But the cattle wouldn't move. Not one step closer. Mert cursed under his breath. They smell something. Maybe water? Boone offered. No, Mert said. Something else. They circled wide, keeping distance, guiding the herd around the fort with slow, careful movements. The cattle moved reluctantly, but obeyed. Just as they passed the far edge, something inside the fort shifted. A sound. Soft. A creak. A whisper. Like a chair moving across wood. Like boots on a floor that hadn't been walked in years. Eli looked back. The door was closed. They hadn't closed it. No one said a word. They kept riding. Behind them, the fort stood still, empty or not. The sun crawled slowly overhead as the trail began to stretch wider, flatter. The hills faded behind them, and with every mile, the sky seemed to grow bigger. There was no shade, no shelter, no curve in the land to break the sameness. Just dry dirt and low brush and a long straight line of hoofprints in the dust. They rode quiet. Even Boone, even the cattle had stopped making much noise. Just the soft shuffle of hooves, the occasional grunt, the sound of flies buzzing around their heads. The food had turned. The last batch of biscuits had molded from heat and time, and even the dried beef tasted like salt-covered leather. Still, no one complained. There wasn't any point. You just chewed and swallowed and told your stomach to stop hoping. Cal found a tin of beans he'd stashed in his saddlebag 2 weeks ago. He split it 4 ways. They didn't even heat it, just passed it from hand to hand, eating it cold with their fingers. I ever get out of this, Cal mumbled. I'm opening a restaurant. Boone snorted. What, for coyotes? Nope, Cal said, dead serious. Real food. Warm food. With forks and tablecloths. Boone looked at the can in his hand. I don't even remember what tablecloths look like. Silas didn't say anything. He just chewed slow and watched the sky. That evening, clouds started to gather on the far edge of the horizon, dark and low, too heavy to ignore. The kind that didn't bring rain, just wind and trouble. Eli scanned the sky. They had maybe 2 hours, 3 if they were lucky. Storm? Mert asked. Not the good kind, Silas replied. Dust. They picked up the pace. The cattle didn't like it, but they followed. Dust storms didn't care who you were or how long you'd been riding. They just came and swallowed everything. By the time the wind started to whip at their coats, they'd found a low, dry creek with high banks. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. They drove the cattle in, used blankets and saddlecloths to shield the worst of the wind. Eli tied Hazel's reins to a crooked root and pressed his back to the wall. The sky turned orange, then brown. Then the world disappeared in a wall of dust. It wasn't the kind of wind that screamed, it growled. Low and constant, filling your nose, your mouth, your ears. You breathed through your shirt and still tasted grit. For hours, they sat in the gloom. The cattle moaned softly. Horses shifted. One of them screamed and reared, but no one could see which one it was. Just shadows and outlines in the dust. Boone's voice floated through the storm. Is this what it's like in hell? No one answered. Maybe he wasn't asking. Eventually, the wind began to ease. Slowly, like a beast that had tired itself out. The dust thinned, and shapes returned. First the curve of the canyon wall, then the silhouettes of animals, then the men, blinking with red-rimmed eyes. Everything was coated in brown. Skin, saddles, teeth. Hazel had broken free during the storm, but she hadn't run far. Eli found her standing stiff, trembling, nose full of sand. He stroked her neck and led her back gently. "We can't do another day like that," Cal said. His voice sounded dry, like cracked glass. Silas looked toward the west. "There's a watering hole 10 miles up. If it's not dry." "If it is?" Boone asked. Silas didn't answer. They set out before sunrise. The land still tasted like dust, but the air had cooled slightly. The storm had taken something with it. Some of the heat, some of the smell, maybe even some of the fear, just for a little while. The watering hole wasn't much to look at. A shallow depression with a pool no bigger than a wagon wheel. But there was water, real water, muddy, warm, but wet. The cattle crowded around it, snorting and fighting for a sip. The men waited their turn. Eli filled his canteen and drank slow. It tasted like dirt and iron, but it didn't matter. His throat stopped hurting, and the ache in his stomach eased. Boone lay back on a rock, eyes closed. "I ever get home, I'm building a bath. Big one, with soap. You'd still smell bad," Cal said. Boone didn't even bother arguing. Later that afternoon, they found the tracks. Boot prints. Not theirs. Fresh. Too fresh. Silas crouched beside them, ran his fingers over the dirt. 6 men, maybe 7, riding light, fast, outlaws. Mert asked. "Could be." Boone looked nervous. "Could be worse than outlaws." Eli didn't ask what he meant. He didn't want to know. That night, they doubled the watch. 1 man up every 2 hours. Rifles ready. Fires low. When it was Eli's turn, the sky was deep black. No moon, just stars like tiny holes poked in velvet. He sat near the edge of camp, back against a rock, Hazel dozing beside him. Somewhere in the dark, something moved. He heard it. A whisper of footsteps. A breath. Not animal. Human. He stood, slowly, quietly. "Who's there?" No answer. He waited. Nothing. Then, just as he started to relax, something flashed past the edge of his vision. A shape. Tall. Thin. He raised his rifle, heart pounding. "Show yourself." Still silence. He moved forward a few steps, boot crunching softly. Then he saw it. A mark on the ground. Drawn in the dust. A symbol. A circle with a jagged line through it. He stared at it. Boone had mentioned something like that back near the fort. A carved symbol on a tree. Eli hadn't thought much of it then. But now, he wiped it away with his boot. Didn't tell the others. Some things didn't need to be shared. They rode the next day in silence. The land had flattened out completely. No trees. No shade. Just endless low hills and brush. That night, they came across an old signpost, weather-beaten and cracked. 2 words scratched into it with a knife. "Turn back." Boone stared at it. Someone really didn't want visitors. Mert shook his head. "Trail's too far gone now. Ain't nowhere else to go." Eli looked out across the flat horizon, where the land shimmered under the heat like water that wasn't real. He had a strange feeling in his chest. Not fear, not dread, just a knowing. They were getting close. To something. They passed the sign without another word. Just nodded quietly, pressed forward. Nobody wanted to be the one to say what they were all thinking, that the trail felt different now. Heavier, as if they'd crossed into a place that didn't want them. The cattle felt it too. Even the steers that usually wandered from the path were suddenly close, bunching together like children in a thunderstorm. The horses flinched at every gust of wind. Something about the silence unsettled them. The way the air didn't carry birdsong or the buzzing of flies like usual. Just wind and dust. By midday, the heat returned stronger than before. Not blazing, not scorching, just relentless. The kind that didn't burn your skin but cooked your thoughts. Boone tied a rag around his head and pulled his hat low, riding with his eyes half shut. Cal started humming to himself. Off-key, tuneless. Just something to fill the silence. "You all right?" Eli asked him gently. Cal shrugged. "Just tired. Trail does that." They came upon a stretch of land dotted with the remains of wagons, half-buried wheels, sun-bleached boards, and rusted iron nails poking up like forgotten teeth. Not burned, not torn apart, just abandoned, left behind. Silas climbed down and poked through one of the wagons with the end of his rifle. Nothing left, he muttered. Been here a while. Think they were headed where we're going? Boone asked, staying in the saddle. Silas didn't answer, just looked westward again. Always westward. They camped that night near a shallow arroyo where the wind whispered louder than usual. It carried voices, half-formed, gentle sounds that might have been words or might have just been the breeze through the rocks. Still, it made sleep hard to find. Boone lay with his hands behind his head, eyes open to the stars. You ever think we're being followed? He whispered. Eli turned over. Why? Nothing I can prove. Just a feeling. You know. Eli didn't say anything. Boone added, I ain't scared. Not really. Just wish I knew if something was out there. Watching. Silas, still awake by the fire, finally said, Trail's full of ghosts, Boone. Always has been. Some of them just ride quieter than others. The fire crackled. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote barked once, then went quiet again. In the morning, one of the cattle was missing. They found tracks leading away from camp, single file. Too clean for a steer. Boots. Someone had let it off. Silas crouched near the trail. Didn't kill it. Just took it. Eli scanned the horizon. Nothing moved out there. Just low hills and dust. Could have been anyone, Boone muttered. Could have been Indians. Silas shook his head. No, this was one man. Maybe two. No arrows. No signs of struggle. Just walked up and took it. Then why just one cow? Mert asked. Maybe they're testing us, Kel said quietly. Nobody laughed. That day, they pressed harder than usual. No stopping. No breaks. They didn't talk about it, but the tension rode with them, settled over the group like an extra saddle, too heavy and too close. Eli's hands hurt from gripping the reins so long. His lips were cracked, and every breath tasted like old leather and dust. Still they rode. Toward evening, they saw it. A figure, far ahead, standing on a ridge. It didn't move. At first, they thought it was a rock or a tree stump. But it was too tall, too straight. Just a lone silhouette watching them from the horizon. Silas raised his rifle, stared down the sights. The figure didn't flinch. Think it's real? Cal asked, voice low. It's watching, Silas said. That's real enough. Then the figure turned, slowly, and walked away behind the ridge. They didn't chase. They didn't call out. They just kept riding. That night, they didn't make a fire. Just bedded down in the dry grass with rifles in their hands. The cattle lay restless, snorting and shifting like they didn't trust the dark. Eli stayed up long past his watch, staring into the emptiness. He thought about home, about his mother's kitchen, his brother's bad guitar playing. He couldn't remember the name of the dog they'd had growing up. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. When sleep finally came, it wasn't deep, just a shallow drift. Enough to dream without forgetting where he was. In the dream, he was riding alone through the dust. No cattle, no trail, just an endless plain, and somewhere behind him, he heard hooves. Close, but never catching up. He turned in the saddle, but there was nothing there. He woke up sweating. Beside him, Boone was already sitting up, watching the hills. What is it? Eli asked. Boone didn't look at him. They're closer now. I can feel it. Eli didn't ask who they were. He wasn't sure he wanted to know. The trail narrowed again the next day, cutting through a small canyon with high, crumbling walls. They moved slow, rifles out. Every echo felt like footsteps behind them. Halfway through, they found another symbol. This one carved into the rock. Same as before, a circle broken through the center. Boone spat in the dirt. That's the third one. We're being marked, Silas said. For what? No one answered. The walls closed tighter. The air turned dry, thin. Sound didn't carry the same way here. It dropped quickly, like it didn't want to travel too far. Then Cal's horse stopped. Wouldn't budge. He kicked, pulled, swore. The horse just shook, trembling from hoof to tail. Something's wrong, Cal whispered. He knows something. They turned around. The canyon behind them was empty. Still, something felt close, like breath on the back of the neck. Let's move, Silas said. Now. They pushed through the last half-mile faster than they should have. Nearly lost 2 cattle to the rocks. But no one cared. They just needed out. Once they cleared the canyon, the land opened again. Wide, flat. But something had changed. There were no birds, no bugs, no sounds at all, just silence. And above them, the sky had turned an odd shade of gray, like dusk at midday. Boone wiped sweat from his brow. We're not supposed to be here. Silas pointed ahead. There. See it? A small rise. A cabin, maybe. Half buried in sand. They rode toward it slowly. As they got closer, they saw more signs. Tools. Scraps of canvas. A broken wagon half stuck in the ground. Signs of life, but no people. Silas dismounted and walked up to the door. It creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, dust lay thick over everything. Chairs. Table. An old tin cup. But no bodies. No blood. Just an empty place that once had stories. Eli stepped inside, shivering though the air was warm. What happened here? Silas ran a hand across the table, lifted the cup. Still damp inside. Boone checked the back room. Bed still made. Cal stepped in last. He looked around, eyes wide. They left in a hurry. Silas nodded. But they were just here. Why'd they go? Boone asked. And then, without meaning to, Eli said out loud. Or what chased them out? Nobody answered Eli's question, but it stayed there in the room, like a cold draft under a door. What chased them out? Silas set the cup down gently and stepped back out into the light. We don't stay here, he said. Not even for the night. But we haven't eaten, Boone muttered. We eat cold, Silas replied. We sleep on dirt if we have to. But we don't stay in a place where the bed's still warm and the people are gone. Eli agreed. Something about the place didn't sit right. It wasn't just empty. It felt forgotten, like someone had tried to erase it. Cal stayed quiet, staring at the spot where the fire pit had been. Ashes were fresh. Somebody had been here yesterday, maybe even that morning. They moved the cattle out another mile before stopping. Just a short rest, no fire, no unpacking. Just sitting in the dry grass and passing around a stale piece of hardtack. Boone chewed slowly, like it hurt his jaw. You ever wonder if we're making it harder than it needs to be? Eli raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Boone shrugged. Maybe people leave places behind for a reason. Maybe it's not just weather or raiders. Maybe the land gets tired of being walked on. Mert snorted. You trying to write poetry now? Boone smiled faintly. Nah, just tired of ghosts. The sun dropped lower, and they rode another few hours until they found a dry riverbed to camp beside. The stars came out slow that night, like they weren't sure they wanted to show themselves. No one told stories. No one played the harmonica. Just quiet chewing, quiet breathing, and the occasional grunt of a restless steer. Eli sat up for first watch. His rifle rested across his lap, but he didn't feel like a soldier. He felt more like a child watching shadows on the wall. A sound caught his attention, a low creak like leather tightening. He turned toward the noise. Cal, still half asleep, was rolling over in his blanket, muttering to himself. Eli couldn't catch the words, but the tone made his stomach tighten. It wasn't fear or pain, it was pleading. A soft, desperate whisper, like a man asking to be forgiven. He let him sleep. By morning, Cal didn't remember a thing. They rode west again, eyes scanning every ridge and every low dip in the land. The cattle didn't wander anymore. Even the stubborn ones followed close, as if they didn't want to be left alone. Midday brought heat again, a dull, pressing warmth that seemed to come from the earth itself. Not the sun, just the land, like it was exhaling slowly. The water was getting low. Silas held up the last full canteen, shook it gently. We'll need a spring, and soon. There's one on the map, Eli said. Maybe a day out. Boone raised an eyebrow. That old map again? Eli shrugged. It's all we've got. So they followed it. Past more broken fences, more cracked stones, and more bones half buried in the dirt. Cattle bones. Some deer. Once a human jawbone, clean and white like it had been boiled. Nobody said anything when they passed it. As the day wore on, their lips grew drier, voices raspier. Even the horses began slowing. Dust clung to their coats, turning them a uniform pale brown. And then, just before sundown, they saw it green, a patch of it down in a fold of the hills. Real grass. Low, soft-looking, fed by water. They hurried. The spring was still there. A shallow pool, ringed by reeds. Cold and clear and quiet. Too quiet. Eli dropped to his knees and dipped his hands in. It felt like ice, shocking after days of warmth. He drank deep. So did the others. The cattle drank, too, their snorts echoing off the rocks. But Boone stood off to the side, watching the ground. "You see something?" Silas asked him. Boone didn't answer right away. Then he pointed at the far side of the spring. There, pressed into the soft dirt, were boot prints. At least 6 sets. Fresh. Silas stepped closer. Not ours. Nope. Recent. Less than a day. They followed the prints for a while, uphill toward a narrow pass. But they stopped. Just vanished in the rocks. Like whoever made them had been lifted up. Gone, Boone said quietly. Or hiding, Silas added. Either way, they camped far from the water that night, despite their thirst. Just in case. Cal tried to sing, softly under his breath. An old tune, something about home. It didn't last. Even the stars seemed to fade earlier than usual, blanketed by a low cloud or dust, or something heavier. Eli couldn't sleep. He lay there, staring at the shapes in the dark. And that's when he heard it. Not a voice, not a shout, just the sound of breathing. Heavy, slow, not from the men or the horses or even the cattle. From the rocks behind them. He sat up slowly, reached for his rifle. He didn't move fast, didn't want to spook whatever it was. But when he turned around, there was nothing there, only moonlight on stone. Still, he kept his rifle close the rest of the night. And when the sun came up, he wasn't the only one with bloodshot eyes. The next day, they lost another steer. Gone. No signs. No tracks. Just gone. Silas checked the area again. Nothing. Boone paced. Something's watching us. We would have seen it, Eli said. Would we? Boone asked. Nobody had an answer for that. The land changed again by afternoon. Hills turned to cliffs. Narrow paths lined with jagged stone. The trail curved hard north, cutting across a shallow ridge where the wind howled like it had teeth. Cal's horse stumbled there. Went down hard. Cal hit the rocks and didn't get up right away. They rushed over. Eli knelt beside him. You all right? Cal nodded weakly. Just my side. Bruised, I think. They checked. No blood. No broken bones. Just soreness. Boone, meanwhile, looked at the trail ahead. Narrow. Too narrow for all of us. We'll lead the cattle single file, Silas said. It took hours. By the time the sun dipped behind the cliffs, they were still half a mile from the next clear patch. The shadows stretched long and cold. And then it started raining. Not heavy, just a fine mist, cold and steady. Enough to soak through shirts and darken saddles. Boone raised his collar. Great. Just what we needed. Eli helped Cal back onto his horse, slow and careful. We'll make camp as soon as we clear the ledge. But before they could move, a sound echoed across the canyon. Not thunder. Not wind. Voices. Far off. Whispering. Dozens of them. But when they looked, there was nothing to see. No torches. No firelight. No movement at all. Only the rain. And then like before it stopped. Just gone. As if the voices had never been there. But they all heard it. Even the cattle had gone stiff, staring into the dark. Eli said it again, under his breath. We're not alone out here. They didn't speak much after that. Just led the cattle one by one around the curve of the ridge, boots crunching softly against the damp stone. The mist had soaked into everything, coats, hats, even the saddle leather squeaked when they moved. Boone was the last to cross. He kept looking over his shoulder as though someone might be behind him, just out of sight. He didn't hear anything, but that didn't bring comfort. Down in the hollow below, they found a small patch of flat ground beside a crumbling wall. Maybe the ruins of an old fort or a trading post. Hard to tell. Most of it had fallen in on itself, and what remained had moss growing over the stones. They didn't care. It was flat, and it was dry enough. No fire tonight. The men ate dried apples and stale bread in silence. Mur tried to chew jerky, but it had turned stiff from the cold. He gave up halfway through and tossed it to a crow perched nearby. The bird just blinked at it and flew off. The sky had gone dull. No stars. Just a soft, gray darkness that didn't feel like night. It felt like the in-between. Like the whole world was waiting for something. Think we'll be out of these hills soon? Eli asked. Silas gave a slight nod. Couple more days if we keep moving. Boone adjusted his blanket. We've said that before. Nobody answered him. They lay down one by one. No one argued over watch rotation. Everyone knew nobody would really sleep, just resting with their eyes shut, listening to the land breathe. Somewhere in the middle of the night, a horse whinnied, loud and sharp. Eli sat up quick, reached for his rifle. His heart jumped before he even opened his eyes. He scanned the dark. All the horses were still there, but one of them had turned, facing the ridge, staring, ears forward, muscles stiff. Eli moved slow, got to his feet, stepped to the edge of the camp. Then he heard it. Crunch. Footsteps. Not running, not sneaking, just walking. One step, then another, then silence. He waited. Nothing. His hands tightened around the rifle. Boone stirred behind him. You hear that? Yeah. Something's out there. They stood there for a while, not moving, not blinking. Eventually, the noise didn't come back, but that didn't mean it was gone. At dawn, Silas walked the perimeter. He came back frowning. Something passed through the grass last night. Big, heavy-footed. Wolf? Cal asked. No. Walked like a man. They packed up in a hurry. Didn't eat. Didn't talk much. Just pushed forward further into the narrowing canyon. Eli noticed the cattle growing jumpy again. They weren't easy animals to scare, but even the older bulls kept glancing around, shifting nervously. Cole fell back a bit. Rode beside Eli. You believe in ghosts? He asked. Eli considered it. No, but I believe in places remembering things. Like land carrying memory. The kind that never fades. Cal nodded. Yeah, that sounds about right. The day passed quiet. Too quiet. Even the wind had stopped. By late afternoon, they came across another strange marker. A post. Wooden. Weather-worn. With 3 bones nailed to it in a triangle. Cattle bones, most likely. Nobody touched it. They rode wide around it. Silas didn't say anything for a long while. Then finally, he said, We'll make camp early tonight. Before dark, they stopped near a stream that barely trickled, tucked in a small basin ringed by stone. It was defensible. Tight. One way in, one way out. That night, they did make a small fire. Just enough to keep the edge of the cold off. The cattle circled close, like they didn't want to stray. Boone took first watch. Eli stayed up with him a little while. Ever get the feeling we're being herded? Boone asked. What do you mean? I mean, we think we're leading the herd. But what if we're the ones being led? Like something wants us to go this way. Through the mountains. Through the Badlands. Eli glanced toward the cliffs. Why would something do that? Boone shrugged. Don't know. But it feels like we're being watched. Not just last night. For days. Eli couldn't disagree. Still, they needed to move. West was the only direction that made sense. He got a few hours of rest. Light sleep. The kind where dreams and reality blurred together. He dreamed of a cabin, warm, with light in the windows. A woman stood inside, humming an old lullaby. He tried to call to her, but no sound came out. Then her face shifted, and the dream faded into gray. Morning brought fog. Thick, heavy. They couldn't see more than a dozen steps ahead. Still, they rode. Single file. Slow. By noon, they reached what the map called Dead Elk Pass. They all hated the name. The pass itself was narrow. Just wide enough for one cart, if anyone still used carts here. Sheer cliffs rose on either side. The kind of place perfect for an ambush. But there was no turning back now. They moved quiet. No one spoke. Even the cattle kept their heads low. About halfway through, Mert's horse stopped. Just froze. What's wrong? Silas asked. Mert didn't answer. He was looking ahead. There across the trail was a pile of bones. Human. Old but not ancient. Clothing still clung to parts of them. A belt buckle. A torn boot. Someone else had come through this pass and hadn't made it out. We keep moving, Silas said softly. Mert hesitated, then urged his horse forward. No one touched the bones. No one prayed. They just moved on, boots pressing gently into the dust. At the far end of the pass, the land opened again. Grass. Low hills. A few scraggly trees. Freedom. Relief. But as they came out onto the open trail, Boone looked back one last time. He stared at the pass, at the narrow slit in the rock. And then he said, barely a whisper, something followed us through. Eli turned. Nothing was there. But he felt it too. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was watching. Waiting. and they still had 100 miles to go. They didn't say much after leaving Dead Elk Pass. Nobody wanted to talk about what they saw. Not the bones, not the strange noises at night, not the feeling that something invisible trailed behind them. The land ahead stretched wide, with rolling hills and low brush that barely moved in the wind. The cattle had more room now. They walked looser, a little more relaxed. But the men didn't. Their eyes still scanned the tree lines and the horizon, watching for shadows that didn't belong. Eli noticed something strange that afternoon. Every time they crossed a small stream or rode by a tree that looked just a little too still, his horse would twitch its ears and glance to the left. Always the left, never the right, as if something in that direction kept drawing its attention. Boone noticed it too. Left side again, he muttered as they crested a hill. Always the same. Maybe that's just where the wind's shifting from, Eli offered. Boone shook his head. Ain't no wind. They rode in silence for another hour before Silas called a stop. We'll water the herd here, then move another few miles before sundown, he said. The watering spot was a shallow creek, barely knee-high, but clear and fresh enough to trust. The cattle drank eagerly, and the men dismounted to stretch their legs. Mert kicked at some stones near the edge. Found wagon tracks, he said. Old, but still here. Silas walked over. Bent down. Yeah, maybe a month back. Could have been a settler train. Or maybe another herd. Boone squinted into the distance. If they made it through here, where they go? Could have veered west. Could have got taken too. Nobody asked what he meant by taken. It was just something people said out here. The prairie had its own language. Words like gone, vanished, or taken didn't mean the same thing as in town. Out here, they weren't just figures of speech. They were warnings. Quiet ones. They moved on before the sun dropped too low. That night, the wind finally returned. It wasn't loud, but steady. It whispered through the grass like it carried messages from long ago. Like it had something to say, but didn't quite know how to say it. They made camp in a slight dip beside some cottonwood trees. A natural windbreak. The fire was low and steady, warm enough to keep their hands from going stiff. Silas sat beside the flames, turning a tin cup slowly in his hands. I've been thinking, he said, about what we've seen. Bones. Markers. That feeling we're not alone. Eli waited. I think someone tried to settle these parts once, Silas continued. Long time ago. Not government. Not surveyors. Just folks. Maybe even folks like us. Drifted too far west. What happened to them? Cal asked. Silas didn't answer right away. Just looked at the fire. I think the land swallowed them. Not fast. Not all at once. But slow. Quiet. The kind of disappearance where nobody even notices at first. Boone leaned forward. You mean the land's cursed? I mean the land remembers. And maybe it don't like strangers. They didn't argue with that. Some places don't want to be crossed. Some places never forget. They kept the fire low that night. Took turns on watch. But even when they weren't on duty, nobody slept deep. Just rested with eyes half shut, ears open, every breath matching the rhythm of the wind. Around midnight, Eli was on watch. He stared into the dark, letting his eyes adjust. That's when he saw it. Not movement, not noise, but shape, far off, beyond the edge of the trees. A figure, still as stone. He blinked, looked again. Gone. He stood slowly, rifle in hand, took a few steps forward. Nothing there, but the cattle were stirring again. Not panic, just restless. Something was near, or maybe watching. By morning, the shape was gone, if it had even been there at all. They packed up in silence again, and rode. The hills began to flatten out around noon, giving way to open prairie. Golden grass stretched for miles. Here and there, cottonwood trees stood like old guardians, spaced too far apart to offer real shade. They stopped briefly to check the herd's hooves. One calf had a split that needed wrapping. Mert handled it gently, humming an old song while he worked. When they set off again, Eli fell back a little. He watched the herd from behind, noticing their patterns. The way they shifted slightly, always moving toward the western horizon, even when the trail curved. Like they knew where they wanted to go, or like something was pulling them there. That evening, the air changed again. It got warmer. Too warm for the season. The clouds turned copper near the edges, and the smell of dust thickened. Storm's coming, Silas muttered. Eli nodded. You smell it too? Yeah. Been building for a while. They moved fast, looking for shelter. Just before nightfall, they found an old corral. Mostly fallen, but still offered some structure. A rotted barn stood nearby, slumped like it had given up long ago. They tied the cattle close and packed them in. The wind rose suddenly, loud and dry, like it had blown in from another century. The storm hit not long after. It wasn't thunder or rain, just wind and dust. The sky went black, the kind of dark that felt thick, like smoke, like night itself had weight. The men huddled in the barn, clutching blankets and squinting against the sting of grit in their eyes. Boone cursed quietly. It's like the land don't want us here. Silas didn't answer. Outside, something creaked, then snapped. A loud crack, maybe a board, maybe something else. Eli stood, moved toward the door, opened it slowly. Dust swirled in waves. He saw the corral. The fence had fallen, but the cattle weren't running. They were standing still, all of them, staring in the same direction, toward the trees. Eli followed their gaze. He saw nothing, but he felt it, a presence, heavy, silent, watching, waiting. And then, from the darkness, came a soft, low whistle. Not the wind, not one of them, just a single, eerie sound. Then silence again. Eli stepped back inside. I think we're not alone out here, he said. Nobody argued. The storm passed by morning, but something had changed, and the road ahead was only getting stranger. The next morning, the sky was pale and washed out, like the land had taken a long breath after the storm and wasn't sure what to do next. Dust still clung to everything, the cattle, their gear, even their eyelashes. The barn looked worse in daylight, barely standing, its roof mostly caved in and its walls cracked like old bones. Still, it had done its job. They'd made it through the night. Nobody said much while they packed up. The usual joking, the small talk, even Boone's sarcastic remarks were missing. The silence felt heavier than the air, stretching over them like a shadow. Eli glanced once more toward the tree line, the place where all the cattle had stared the night before. He couldn't see anything unusual, but something about it still made the back of his neck itch. As they rode out, Mert fell in beside him. The youngest of the group, Mert wasn't one to spook easy, but his face was pale, and his hand stayed near his rifle. Last night, he said quietly, did you hear it too? Eli nodded. The whistle. Another nod. You think it was just wind? Eli looked ahead at the horizon. No, they didn't talk about it anymore. There wasn't much to say. The prairie didn't care about fear or questions. It just kept going. By midday, the land began to shift again. The open plains gave way to gullies and small canyons, winding paths carved out by rivers long dried up. The trail narrowed, and visibility dropped. It was the kind of place perfect for an ambush or for getting lost. They tightened formation, kept close, and moved slower. Silas rode point, eyes sharp, scanning the ridges above. He was thinking about bandits. This was the kind of territory they liked, hidden, remote, easy to trap someone in. And cattle drives were always a target. A 100 head of steer meant money, and out here, money meant everything. Boone muttered from behind, feels like we're being funneled. What do you mean? Cal asked. Like the land is pushing us this way. We didn't choose this path, not really. The terrain did. Eli agreed. He hadn't realized it until Boone said something, but he couldn't remember the last time they truly had a choice in which way to go. They were always reacting to the weather, to the cattle, to the shape of the land itself. Something about that bothered him more than he liked to admit. They camped that night in a hollow between two hills, with walls high enough to shield them from the wind, but low enough to keep watch. Still, it felt tight, like sleeping in a closed box. Around the fire, they tried to bring back some normalcy. Mert cooked up beans and dried pork, adding a pinch of spice he'd carried in a pouch since they left Texas. The smell helped. So did the warmth. For a moment, it felt like just another night on the trail. Then Cal pulled something from his saddlebag. A book. Worn at the edges, pages curled from moisture. What's that? Boone asked. Journal, Cal said. Picked it up in Abilene from a fella headed back east. Said he found it in an abandoned cabin west of here. Eli raised an eyebrow. And you just bought it? Didn't pay much. Just thought it was interesting. Silas frowned. What's in it? Cal flipped through the pages. Mostly notes. Weather. Cattle conditions. Some entries about strange noises. People disappearing. "Let me see that," Silas said. He took the book and read a few lines aloud. The handwriting was small, scratched like the writer had been in a hurry. "Third man gone this week. No sign. Only a boot left. Camp's quiet now. No one speaks at night. Something is out there. I think we brought it with us." The men fell silent again. Silas closed the book slowly and handed it back. "Could just be someone with an imagination. Or someone who didn't make it out," Mertz said. That night, nobody volunteered for the first watch. They had to draw straws. Boone got the short one. He sat on a rock above camp, rifle across his knees, scanning the shadows. The cattle were quiet again, too quiet. Usually, one or two would shuffle or snort. But not tonight. It was like they were holding their breath. Boone tried to stay awake, but his eyes drifted, just for a second, and that's when he heard it. Footsteps. Not close. Not far either. Slow. Deliberate. He stood fast, heart pounding, eyes trying to cut through the dark. Nothing there. But then, a second sound. A breath. Low. Drawn out. Not human. Boone didn't wait. He fired once into the air, the crack echoing through the hills. The others jolted awake, scrambling from their bedrolls, weapons in hand. "What is it?" Silas barked. "Something out there." "I heard it. Might have seen something too." They formed a loose circle, backs to each other, watching the hills. But nothing moved. The silence returned, heavier than before. They waited an hour before settling again. Silas didn't sleep. He sat by the fire, the journal in one hand, his revolver in the other. The next day, they moved faster. The cattle seemed agitated, kept looking back, kept trying to drift off the trail. It took extra effort to keep them in line. Around noon, they came across another marker. Just a pile of rocks, carefully stacked. Too carefully. Mert dismounted and poked at it with a stick. Underneath the top stone was a strip of fabric. Torn, weathered. Boone knelt beside it. This wasn't left by accident. Silas said nothing. He remounted and signaled for the others to follow. They didn't argue. The trail grew narrower as the hills closed in again. The sun hung low even though it wasn't yet evening, shadows stretching longer than they should. At the top of a ridge, they stopped. Below them was a wide basin. Empty. No trees. No signs of life. And in the center, an old structure. A single cabin. Its roof was slanted, half caved in. The door dangled from one hinge. Smoke marks blackened the chimney, long since cold. Silas stared down at it. "You think that's the place the journal came from?" Cal nodded slowly. "Matches the description." Boone whistled. "Looks dead." "Maybe," Eli said. "Or maybe it's waiting." They set off down the slope, the cattle uneasy again, dragging their feet. The closer they got, the more the air felt different. Still, almost too still, like even the wind refused to enter. And behind them, from somewhere unseen, that same low whistle began again. Soft, steady, and far too familiar. They reached the cabin just before sundown, though none of them were eager to step inside. The wooden boards looked dry enough to crumble under a boot, but the door, hanging by that single hinge, moved slightly with every gust like it was still alive. The place didn't look like shelter. It looked like a memory that should have been left behind. Eli volunteered to go first, pushing the door open with the barrel of his rifle. The hinges groaned, and a plume of stale air escaped. The inside was dark and smelled of mold and dust, but there were signs someone had been there, someone recent. The ashes in the fireplace weren't fresh, but they weren't ancient either. A few rusted utensils still sat on a cracked table. There was even a blanket draped over a chair, worn thin and stiff with time. Someone lived here, Mert whispered from behind him. Or died here, Boone added. They swept the cabin carefully. No bodies, no blood. Just the ghost of whoever had come before. Scratches on the walls. Strange symbols etched into the wooden beams, like crude warnings or marks left behind in fear. One corner of the room had a trapdoor. The wood around it was warped and darker than the rest, like moisture had soaked through, or something else had. Leave it, Silas said before anyone could touch it. We're not here to dig up the past. Eli nodded. They'd seen enough. That night, they set up camp a short distance away, out of sight of the cabin. Nobody wanted to look at it while they slept. The cattle were restless again, moving in tight circles, as if trying to protect themselves. Eli stayed awake long past his watch, listening. The wind howled low between the hills, but there were other sounds too, faint and broken, like footsteps too light to be hooves, whispers too soft to be words. Mert moved closer to the fire, arms crossed tight. You think this trail's cursed? Eli didn't answer right away. I think it remembers things, he finally said. Things that were done here. Things that stayed. The next morning, half the cattle had drifted further down the trail overnight. They'd broken off on their own, something they'd never done before. It took hours to round them up, and when they did, Silas noticed something strange. They're not just scattered, he said, pointing. They're leading us. And sure enough, the cattle weren't just grazing randomly. They were walking in a specific direction, following no clear trail through brush and scrub and up over uneven terrain. But they moved with purpose, like they knew where they were going, like something had pulled them. By the time the sun was high, the group stumbled upon an old wagon wreck. It was buried half in a ditch, the wheels snapped, the wood eaten away by time. Vultures circled above, but no bodies remained. Only bones dry, stripped clean. Boone knelt to inspect the ground. Looks like it's been here a while. Cal squinted. You think this was from another drive? Silas nodded. Could be. Or it was someone trying to leave whatever this place is. Inside the wagon was a small wooden box, half smashed and filled with personal items. A comb, a cracked mirror, a child's boot. That's not from Cowboys, Mert muttered. That's from a family. Boone looked around. So where are they? No one answered. There was no sign of graves. No signs of struggle either. Just vanishing. The trail got harder after that. The land grew less forgiving. Rocks sharper. Paths narrower. And always that same feeling followed them, like being watched but never finding eyes. The cattle wouldn't sleep at night anymore. They just stood still, ears twitching toward unseen things. Even the horses were uneasy. At dusk, while setting up camp, Cal found something in his saddlebag. A stone, smooth, gray, placed neatly at the very bottom. He hadn't packed it. Nobody else had touched his gear. When he showed it to the group, Eli took it and turned it in his hand. That's the same kind of stone from the marker pile, he said. The one we found near the cloth. Boone frowned. So someone or something is marking us now? Mert looked around the ridge. I don't like this. I don't think we're supposed to be here. Too late for that, Silas muttered. That night, the journal came out again. Cal handed it to Silas without speaking. He flipped to a later entry. Saw them again. Figures at the edge of the ridge. No footprints. No sound. Just watching. We try to leave, but the trail bends back. We're stuck. Mert read over his shoulder. Bend back. Boone looked around. You think we've been going in circles? Eli shook his head. No, not circles. Spirals. Like we're being led deeper. The fire burned low. No one slept easily. The wind picked up again, colder than before, sharper. The kind that bites at your skin and makes your bones feel too close to the surface. In the middle of the night, Eli awoke with a start. A sound, like something dragging across the ground. Not hooves, not boots. He sat up and scanned the area. The fire was nearly out. The cattle stood frozen. The others stirred, sensing something too. A figure moved past the edge of camp. Tall, thin, its shape hard to define. Eli reached for his rifle, but by the time he stood, it was gone. Silas rose, too. You saw it. Eli nodded. It wasn't a man. Morning brought no peace. The group rode harder now, desperate to break free of whatever unseen pressure hung over them. But the trail kept bending, twisting in unnatural ways. Even the sun seemed to shift in the sky too quickly, casting long shadows before noon. By midday, they came upon something unexpected, a signpost. Wooden, freshly carved. One word, return. They stared at it in silence. Someone doesn't want us going forward, Boone said. Mert looked behind them. Maybe we should listen. Silas stared at the trail ahead. Maybe that's what it wants. They argued for the first time since leaving the cabin. Boone and Mert wanted to turn back. Eli wasn't sure anymore. And Silas. Silas was quiet, eyes distant, almost like he was remembering something that hadn't happened yet. Finally, he spoke. We keep going. No one dared oppose him, not out loud. But as they packed and mounted up again, something unspoken hung in the air. Not fear anymore. Acceptance. They were part of something now. And whatever waited at the end of the trail, it was watching. Just over the next hill, the land dropped suddenly, revealing a massive canyon. In the center stood a structure they hadn't expected. Stone walls, weathered and ancient-looking, half buried in rock. Like a forgotten outpost from a time before maps. There was smoke rising from its center. Not much, but enough to mean one thing. They weren't alone, and whatever was down there was waiting for them. They stood at the edge of the ridge for a long while, none of them speaking. The wind tugged at their coats and made the horses shift anxiously under their weight. That structure down below, whatever it was, didn't belong. Not because it was broken or weathered or even out of place, but because it felt wrong. Like the land had grown around it unwillingly, like the earth had tried to swallow it and failed. Eli's voice came quiet. That smoke's not from yesterday. It's burning now. Boone spit into the dirt, his jaw tense. I'd rather face a gang of bandits than go down there blind. Mert glanced back over his shoulder. The trail behind them looked different now. Narrower, darker. Trail's closing behind us, he muttered. They don't want us going back. Silas started, leading his horse down the ridge without another word. The rest followed, each step downhill feeling like a thread stretching tighter. The canyon walls swallowed the light, and the smoke got thicker as they moved, though they still heard no sounds, no voices, no fire crackling, nothing that made sense. The path ended abruptly at a stone archway. Moss grew thick across it, and strange symbols were carved along the edges, some sharp and jagged, others looping and smooth. Boone touched one with the back of his glove. It was warm. Feels fresh, he whispered. They stepped through in single file, and on the other side, the temperature changed. The air felt dense, almost sticky, like breathing through damp cloth. The smoke wasn't from firewood. It had a bitter metallic scent to it, and it clung to their clothes. The structure turned out to be more than just a building. It was part of something larger, a whole abandoned compound. Collapsed walls and half-buried chambers stretched into the ground. It looked older than any fort Eli had ever seen, maybe older than the trail itself. They dismounted and tied the horses loosely to a rusted iron ring buried in the stone. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Everyone felt it. This place knew they were here. Inside, the first room they entered looked like an old dining hall. Stone benches along a long table, all crumbling. But the floor had fresh footprints. Small ones. Bare feet. Dozens of them. Children. Mert said, his voice a thread. Silas shook his head. No child lived in a place like this. The footprints led through a narrow passage, disappearing into the dark. Eli lit a small lantern and stepped carefully, watching the floor. The symbols from the archway were here too, drawn in charcoal across the stone walls. And then voices. Not clear, not full sentences, just fragments. Humming, breathing. A name whispered again and again. Jericho. Jericho. Boone stopped cold. That name means something to you? Eli didn't answer, but it did. He'd read it before, scrawled in the back of the journal they'd found earlier. Not in a full entry. Just a single word at the bottom of a page. Jericho. They moved further in. At the heart of the ruin, they found what looked like a gathering space. A circular room, ceiling long since caved in. In the center, a stone basin filled with water. Perfectly still, despite the wind blowing through. Boone leaned over it and froze. What? Eli asked. Boone didn't answer, just pointed. In the water, reflections appeared, but not of the room. Not of them. Scenes played on the surface. Men riding horses, cattle falling sick, boots dragging across dry land. Things they had seen, but from outside their own eyes. Like memories being stolen and replayed. Mert backed away. I'm done. I want out. I don't care if the trail's closed. I'll go through brush and desert if I have to. Silas looked at the basin a moment longer. This is why we're here, he said. This thing it's watching. It always has. Eli looked at the reflection again. But this time, it wasn't something from the past. It was something they hadn't seen yet. Boone. Alone. Running. Screaming. Something chasing him through tall grass. Something unseen but fast. The image shattered. The water went still. They all stood frozen. What was that? Mert asked, barely able to breathe. Silas answered like it was fact. A warning. They left the basin behind, but the sound of that reflection breaking followed them as they moved, like something cracking just below the surface of their own minds. Outside, the smoke had stopped. The wind was louder now, howling through the ruins. The cattle were restless again, their eyes wide, hooves stomping. The horses wouldn't calm down either. Boone started pacing. We need to leave. Now. Burn this place behind us if we have to. No fire's going to fix this, Eli said. Whatever it isn't in the stone. It's in the land. Silas stood still, staring off down a new path that forked beyond the ruin. The cattle led us here. They knew. Maybe they know where we're supposed to go next. No way I'm trusting a herd over my own gut, Boone snapped. Your gut doesn't know where we are anymore, Silas replied. The group split for the first time that afternoon. Mert stayed with Boone. Eli stayed near Silas. Cal hadn't spoken since the canyon. He just stood staring at the dirt, muttering something under his breath. When night came, they didn't build a fire. They knew better. That's when the sound started. It wasn't wind. It wasn't animals. It was humming. A low, tuneless hum, like a lullaby being sung through clenched teeth. It circled the camp, never approaching, just staying right out of reach. Then came the scratching. On the stones. On the saddlebags. On the bark of the twisted trees near camp. Boone fired a shot into the dark. Silence. Nothing screamed. Nothing ran. But when they checked his saddlebag, another stone. Same size. Same shape. Fresh this time. Still warm from wherever it had come. The symbols carved into it were different. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was a map. And it pointed further in. Silas stared at it, then back at the others. It's not over yet, he said. We're being invited. Eli looked around the circle of men, their eyes reflecting only fear and dust. Or hunted, Boone muttered. But even he didn't move to leave. Because deep down, they all knew something now. This land, this trail, it wasn't forgotten. It was remembered. And whatever lived here didn't want them gone. It wanted them to see, to understand. And the next step in the journey was just beyond the last marker. Waiting. They didn't sleep that night. None of them. Not even Cal, who usually snored through thunderstorms. The quiet out there wasn't natural. It was the kind of silence that presses against your ears until your own heartbeat feels too loud. Every few minutes, one of them would sit up and check the darkness, waiting for something. But nothing came. Just the sound of cattle breathing heavy and the wind scraping dry branches against stone. At first light, they studied the stone again. Boone was the first to speak. Map or not, this thing's got bad intentions. Leading us deeper ain't a gift, it's bait. His voice was hoarse, like he'd aged a few years overnight. Silas didn't argue, but he held the stone close and studied the marks with careful eyes. Something carved this recently. Not ancient, not worn. Whatever's out here, it's still moving. Mert rolled up his gear in silence. He didn't want to go deeper, but he wasn't about to get left behind. The trail had split them more than once, but some part of him knew sticking together might be the only reason they were still breathing. They saddled up and followed the map. The new trail cut through a low ravine lined with sharp rocks. Dust swirled with every hoof step. The cattle had started moving without any herding, like they were drawn by something too deep to explain. Every so often, they'd pause at certain spots, an old dry well, a split tree, a patch of dirt blackened like it had been burned years ago, and they'd just stare, then move on. The riders didn't talk much that morning. Each of them pulled into their own thoughts. Eli kept going back to the journal, flipping through the smudged pages. Most of the entries were useless, weather reports, trail notes, sick cattle. But one section was different. The ink was darker, the handwriting rushed. It mentioned a name again, Jericho, followed by a strange phrase. He sees in sleep. He hears in dust. That phrase stuck with him. He didn't know why, but he didn't share it with the others yet. Around midday, the trail opened to a basin. The heat there felt worse somehow, even though the sun hadn't changed. The cattle slowed to a crawl, their hooves hesitant, and a few refused to go forward at all. That's when Cal finally spoke. "We're being watched." Everyone turned to him. He was pointing toward a shadow in the rocks, long and still, too sharp to belong to anything natural. When they moved closer, it disappeared. Nothing there. No tracks. No figure. Just a dry patch of dirt and a broken tree limb. Boone cursed under his breath. This place is driving us mad. But deep down, they all agreed with Cal. They were being watched. They kept going. By late afternoon, they reached what looked like an abandoned trail marker, an old wooden post leaning at an angle, tied with faded cloth strips. The cloth looked almost ceremonial, like someone had used it to ward something off. Boone dismounted and untied one of the strips. A gust of wind kicked up immediately, whipping dust into his eyes. When he looked down, the strip had words stitched into it. Old letters. Worn. Barely readable. "Do not wake the land." Silas took the cloth from him and turned it over. The same phrase repeated again and again, in different handwriting, different ink. "We've stepped into a place people try to forget," he said. That night, they stopped near an old spring that had long since dried up. The rocks around it were stained red, like rust or blood. Nobody said it out loud, but they all noticed. They camped in silence, barely touching food, their nerves raw from the weight of whatever was following them. Eli stayed up late, scribbling notes into the back of the journal. He wasn't sure why, but he felt like they had to leave something behind, in case they didn't make it back. While he wrote, he saw Mert watching him. "You really think there's something here?" Mert asked softly. Eli nodded. "Something old. Something buried. Think it's dangerous?" "I think it already is." Mert glanced at the others, asleep or pretending to be. "When I was a boy, my father told stories about land that remembered trespass. He said you don't always get punished right away. Sometimes the land waits. Watches." Eli looked up. "And then it makes sure you never leave." The next morning, the cattle were restless again. 2 had gone missing. No sign of struggle, no tracks. Just gone. Boone blamed coyotes, but no one believed that. They moved on. As they descended into another canyon, the walls grew narrower. The air got colder. A strange mist hovered just above the ground, even though the sun was still high. And that's when they saw it. Marks along the stone, fresh and deep. Not symbols this time. Claw marks. Dozens of them, like something had been dragged along the walls. Eli dismounted and ran his fingers over one of the gouges. Whatever did this wasn't small. Silas scanned the canyon, hand on his rifle. And it wasn't in a hurry. The group moved slowly, rifles ready, the mist curling around their boots. The cattle didn't follow. They refused to enter the canyon. They just stood at the edge and stared. Halfway through, Cal froze. He was looking at something ahead, something they couldn't see yet. "Don't move," he whispered. The others halted. Boone raised his rifle. "What is it?" Cal shook his head, voice dry. "I don't know, but it's looking back." Eli moved forward slowly, and as he stepped into the next clearing, he saw it too. A figure, barely visible in the mist. Tall, motionless, its arms hanging unnaturally long. Its head tilted slightly, as if curious. It didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak, but it watched. Then, without sound or warning, it vanished, like smoke blown apart by wind. Boone pushed forward, shouting into the canyon. But the echo was the only answer. They hurried out, hearts pounding. That night, they didn't set camp. They just rode all the way back to where the cattle waited. But even the animals were wrong now. Silent, stiff, their eyes too wide. They stood like statues, unmoving. And there was something else. Something hanging from a tree just above the herd. A bundle of cloth. Eli climbed the tree and untied it. Inside was a piece of paper, brittle and damp. The same handwriting as the journal. One sentence. It follows memory, not footsteps. Eli's hands trembled. He turned to Silas, who was already staring at him. "This trail doesn't end," Silas said quietly, "because it never started. It's always been here, waiting." Eli nodded slowly. "And now it knows us." And just like that, the wind picked up again. The cattle stirred. And far off in the darkness, the low hum returned. Longer this time. Stronger. As if the land itself was singing something into the dust. And whatever was waiting had finally awakened. The hum didn't fade like it had before. It grew louder, almost like it was circling them. The horses twitched, their ears pinned back, muscles tight. Cal gripped the reins of his bay gelding and whispered calming words, but even his voice felt small under that low, haunting sound. No one could tell where it came from. It echoed off the rocks, vibrated under the ground, and filled the space between thoughts. It wasn't a sound you heard. It was one you felt. They moved again before the sun came up, following no real trail anymore, just the path the cattle had taken, slow and strange. Boone had stopped questioning it. None of them spoke much now. Words felt too loud, too risky. But by mid-morning, something changed. The canyon opened to a wide clearing, flat, dry, surrounded by what looked like broken stone monuments. Not natural formations, but carved, weathered smooth by time. Some stood like pillars. Others had fallen over and cracked. At the center was a wide circle burned into the earth. Nothing grew there. Even the air seemed thinner. The cattle formed a perfect ring around the circle and stopped. Not one of them stepped inside. Silas dismounted first. Seen places like this before. Old burial sites. Maybe older than even that. Eli knelt at the edge of the circle and touched the dirt. It wasn't just dry. It was warm, as if heat rose from underneath. He pulled his hand back fast. "There's something under us," he said. Boone spat into the dust. Or something waiting above. The others stared at him, but he didn't flinch. They spent the day moving around the area, trying to map the stones and figure out where the journal had led them. But the more they explored, the less sense anything made. The land looped strangely. What looked like a half-mile walk brought them right back to the circle, even when they moved in opposite directions. Time felt broken there. The sun didn't seem to move. At one point, Mert took a path through the stones and was gone for nearly an hour. When he came back, he looked pale, shaking. "I walked straight," he said. "Didn't turn, didn't stop. Just kept going. But I came back here, and I heard." He stopped himself. "Heard what?" Cal pressed. "Voices," Mert said, swallowing hard. "Not whispering, chanting. Real slow, real deep." Couldn't understand the words. But it was coming up like from the dirt. That night, they didn't make a fire. They didn't need it. The ground was warm. The circle glowed faintly in the moonlight, like the rocks were holding onto the sun. Nobody slept. Around midnight, Boone stood up suddenly. "I'm gonna break it," he said, heading toward the circle. Silas grabbed his arm. "Break what?" Boone pointed at one of the fallen stone markers. "They made these to trap something, or summon something. Either way, I'm done playing along." "Boone," Eli started, but Boone had already picked up a rock and slammed it against the standing pillar. The sound rang through the clearing, sharp and unnatural. A second later, the ground beneath the circle cracked. A long line split the earth, clean, straight, and heat poured out of it, along with a foul smell like rot and sulfur. Boone backed away. "What did I do?" No one answered. They were all staring into the crack. It wasn't just a split. It was an opening. And something was down there, moving. Silas raised his rifle, heart hammering in his chest. "Everyone back. Now." But as they stepped away, a low growl rumbled up from the split. Not an animal growl. Not even human. It was a sound that didn't belong anywhere in the world above. The cattle broke first. They bolted in every direction, crashing through brush and stone, some heading back toward the canyon, others straight into the open desert. One fell mid-run, legs buckling, and didn't get back up. Mert turned to the others. "We gotta go. Whatever's here, it's not meant for us." But Boone didn't move. He was staring at the crack like he was in a trance. "Boone!" Eli shouted. Boone took a slow step forward, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Then the crack widened, fast and violent, splitting the stone circle in half. A blast of heat and dust shot up, knocking Boone off his feet and sending the others stumbling backward. When the dust cleared, Boone was gone. Not just out of sight gone. No tracks. No sign of fall. Just the circle, now fractured and glowing from beneath. Eli crawled to the edge and screamed his name. Nothing. Just that hum again. Louder now, like it was coming out of Boone's absence. Silas pulled Eli back, both of them shaking. Mert and Cal circled the clearing, rifles raised, scanning for any sign Boone had survived. but the clearing was empty. "Whatever we found," Silas said, voice hollow, "it doesn't want us here." Eli looked around. "Then why hasn't it taken all of us?" Silas didn't answer. The next morning, they packed in silence. Boone's gear stayed behind. None of them could touch it. It felt wrong, like it belonged to the earth now. The trail out was no better than the way in. The cattle were scattered. The ground still warm. And the stones around the clearing now seemed to shift when no one was looking, never quite in the same place twice. Mert pulled Eli aside before they left. "You think Boone's dead?" "I think he's somewhere we can't follow." "You think he's alone?" Eli didn't know what to say to that. They rode hard, retracing what steps they could, though everything had changed. Familiar paths were gone. Trees that had been healthy days ago were now leafless and blackened. The river they crossed on the way in had vanished completely, leaving behind cracked mud and bleached rocks. Even the sky felt wrong. The sun was too still. The clouds didn't move. They weren't sure how many days passed. At some point, they found one of the cattle standing perfectly still at the edge of a dry gulch. Its eyes were milky white, and its skin hung loosely like it had been stretched. There was no blood, no wounds, just the stench of something very old lingering in the air. Silas put it down quickly. They didn't speak of it. One night, Mert woke up screaming. Said Boone had called to him. Said his voice came from under the ground. "He's not dead," Mert insisted. "He's somewhere close. Buried maybe, or beneath the stones." "We left him." Eli tried to calm him, but Mert wouldn't stop shaking. He said it's watching us through his eyes now. Said we shouldn't have followed the stone. Silas gave him a look. "He's dreaming." "Then how did I hear the words from the journal?" Mert whispered, the ones Eli didn't read out loud. That night, no one slept again. By the time they found the trail's edge, if that's even what it was, there were only 3 of them. Boone gone, the cattle gone, most of their gear gone too. But the stone was still with Eli, wrapped in old cloth and buried in the bottom of his pack. He didn't know why he kept it. He just couldn't bring himself to let it go. As they stood at the crest of the ridge, overlooking what should have been familiar land, Eli turned to Silas. "Think it'll ever stop following us?" Silas didn't look at him. He just stared down at the flat plains below. "No," he said, "because it's already inside us." And behind them, far in the distance where the circle had been, a low hum echoed again, faint, steady, and certain, as if the land remembered, and wasn't finished yet. The wind had a different sound now. It wasn't just moving through the trees or rustling loose dust. It carried something heavier, like a whisper that never quite reached full voice. It chased them even as they left the canyon behind, even as familiar sights returned. But the air didn't feel like home anymore. Something had followed them. Eli couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Not in the usual way. Not like a man watching another man. This was deeper, like something knew him inside and out. Like it had seen things he hadn't lived yet. Mert had gone quiet. He didn't eat, didn't speak unless someone forced words out of him. At night, he sat near the fire, eyes locked on nothing, lips moving like he was praying or repeating something over and over. When Eli asked what he was saying, Mert just blinked slowly. "Trying to forget," he muttered, "but it won't let me. They should have headed back to town. They should have reported Boone missing. They should have warned someone." But every time one of them brought it up, the idea felt wrong, like the words twisted in their mouths before they could even finish the sentence. So they kept riding, kept drifting, not toward anywhere in particular, just away. But the farther they got, the less sense anything made. The sun set too fast. Shadows stretched longer than they should. One night, the stars didn't show up at all. Just a black sky that felt heavy and low. Then the stone started humming again. Eli had hidden it deep in his pack, wrapped it in wool, placed it between 2 thick blankets. But still the sound got through. A low vibration, just barely loud enough to feel in your teeth. Sometimes it came when he was alone. Other times, when they were all together, they'd hear it at once and freeze. "You need to get rid of that thing," Silas said one morning. "Throw it in a river. Bury it. Smash it. I don't care." Eli didn't argue. He agreed. But when he went to do it, when he reached for the cloth-wrapped shape, his hands froze. His heart raced. Something inside him screamed not to do it. "It's like it knows," he whispered. Silas glared at him. Then maybe Boone wasn't the only one it took. That was the first time Eli felt real fear, not just of the stone, but of himself. 2 nights later, Mert disappeared. There were no signs of struggle, no tracks, just his bedroll left open and a single word carved into the dirt nearby. Below, Eli stared at the word for a long time. It wants us underground. Silas didn't say anything. He just kicked dirt over the message and walked off. They rode fast after that. Days blurred. At some point, they lost track of time. Their watches stopped. Even the horses started acting strange, twitchy, refusing to drink from streams, eyes wild and wide. Then they found the cave. It was just past the base of a dry hill, partly hidden by twisted branches and blackened shrubs. They almost passed it by, but the stone in Eli's pack pulsed hard when they got close. So hard he gasped and nearly dropped the horse's reins. "It's down there," he said, voice shaky. "Then we keep riding," Silas growled. "We don't go chasing after it." But Eli shook his head. "Mert's down there. Maybe Boone too. And maybe whatever took them is waiting for us." Still, neither of them moved. The wind picked up behind them. Cold. Wrong. Pushing instead of pulling. It almost herded them toward the cave like an unseen hand was guiding them. "I think we're past choice now," Eli said. Silas sighed, checked his rifle, and nodded once. They lit torches before going in. The inside of the cave smelled like old metal and wet ash. The walls weren't smooth like natural rock. They were ridged, marked by shallow carvings that pulsed faintly as their light passed. The deeper they walked, the more the walls shimmered, not from moisture, but from something alive beneath the stone. They came to a narrow passage that opened into a larger chamber. The air was thick and warm, like standing too close to a fire that wasn't there. In the center of the room, half buried in dirt, was a stone circle, smaller than the one in the canyon, but identical. And standing beside it, silent, unmoving, was Boone. Eli froze. "Boone." His voice cracked. The figure turned slowly. It was Boone, but it wasn't. His face was thinner, eyes darker, like they'd been hollowed out. His mouth didn't move, but they heard his voice. "You shouldn't have come here." Silas stepped forward, gun raised. "Where's Mert?" Boone didn't answer. Instead, he raised one hand and pointed at the stone circle. "She's waiting." Eli's grip on the torch tightened. "She? Who's she?" The room trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. Somewhere in the dark, something groaned, long, low, and ancient. Boone's face didn't change. "You brought her the stone. That's all she needed." Silas backed away slowly. "Eli, we leave. Now." But Eli was still staring at Boone. "At what used to be Boone. She's been down here a long time," Boone said. "Longer than any of us. The stone was just a key. You were just the lock." The ground under their feet cracked, just like it had in the canyon. Heat poured up. The circle began to glow. Not a soft glow, but violent. Alive. Eli took a step back. "Boone," or the thing wearing Boone, smiled. "You opened the door." And then the chamber shook like the mountain itself was alive. Stone split. The walls howled. Not wind, voices. Screaming. Begging. Some in languages neither of them knew. Others in voices they recognized. Mert. Their own. The stone's circle cracked wide. And from below it, something began to rise. Eli turned to Silas. "What do we do?" Silas didn't answer. Because there was no time left. Whatever was coming, it was already here. And it was looking right at them. The light from their torches sputtered as the air shifted again, thick with heat and something foul, like burned meat and rusted iron. Silas stumbled backward, his boot catching on a jagged edge of rock, and for the first time in all their miles together, Eli saw real panic in the old scout's eyes. Whatever had crawled up from beneath that glowing circle, it wasn't shaped like anything from this world. It was huge, but not in any way that made sense. The eye caught glimpses, a limb, too many joints, a shimmer like oil across water, something slithering without a body. It didn't walk. It didn't crawl. It shifted, like it folded the space around it and moved through the cracks. The chamber wasn't big enough for it, but it didn't seem to care. It made room. Eli's knees buckled. He wasn't sure if it was the heat, the fear, or something deeper, something the creature had touched inside him without even laying a hand on his skin. The Boone thing didn't move. It stood by the stone circle like a watchman, or maybe like bait, because now it made sense. Boone wasn't waiting for rescue. Boone was the hook, and they had bitten. You hear it, don't you? Boone asked, or maybe thought, because the sound wasn't coming from his lips. She sings beneath the stone, beneath the desert. Always has. Silas raised his rifle, but the shaking in his arms betrayed him. You brought her voice back, Boone said. That stone in your pack was one of many. Lost. Scattered. But she remembers every piece. Eli tried to move, to run, to scream. Anything, but his body was locked. The creature was moving again. Not fast. Just sure. Like it knew exactly how many steps remained between it and its prey. Its edges shimmered. Its shape never settled. It wasn't just large, it was wrong. As it neared, the temperature dropped suddenly. The fire on Eli's torch blew out with a sharp hiss. Darkness swallowed him, thick and full. Only Silas's torch still burned, flickering wildly as the air twisted with noise. Voices from deep below, whispering things he never wanted to understand. I saw it once, Boone said softly. Long before I touched the stone. I was just a boy. I fell into a crevice out near Devil's Step. Broke my arm, thought I was going to die. But something found me. Something old. She spoke in pictures, in memories. Things I hadn't lived yet. She showed me the fire coming, the hunger under the earth, the need for doors. Silas fired. The shot rang out like thunder, but it didn't hit Boone. It hit the circle, sparks exploding as lead struck glowing stone. Boone didn't flinch. The creature didn't stop. What did you bring us? Silas shouted, his voice torn between fury and terror. She's been here longer than memory, Boone whispered. Longer than Cowboys, than Comanche, than bones in the rock. This land remembers her. She just needed to be remembered by us. Eli finally found his legs again, just enough to stumble sideways. The floor beneath him pulsed like a heartbeat. Hot, cold, hot again, like the ground couldn't decide what season it belonged to. I didn't mean to, he croaked. I didn't want this. But the stone in his pack answered. It glowed through the fabric, hummed louder than ever before. And this time, it wasn't trying to warn him. It was celebrating. The creature reached the edge of the circle. It paused, then reared up, if up even meant anything to something like that. There were eyes. Maybe a dozen. Maybe more. But not in the usual places. Some blinked inside folds of shifting skin. Others blinked inside his head. Eli fell to his knees, gasping. Boone stepped closer, and Eli could finally see his face clearly. Not hollow anymore. Just empty. Like everything that once made Boone human had been drained out, drop by drop, and replaced with quiet worship. She doesn't kill, Boone said. She collects. Then take me, Eli whispered. The word surprised even him. But something inside cracked wide open. A feeling that had started in the canyon and never stopped growing. Regret, maybe. Or guilt. Or something darker. Silas stepped between them. Don't you dare, kid. Eli looked up. I brought this. I brought her. You were tricked. You didn't know what that stone was. That doesn't matter now. Behind them, the chamber rumbled. Dust and pebbles fell from above. Somewhere a wall gave way and the wind rushed in. Not from outside, but below. She was waking up fully now. Boone raised one hand toward the circle. The stone floor beneath it cracked open like thin ice, revealing a pit of glowing black. Shapes moved below the surface. Shaped like memories, shaped like fears. Faces flickered there, Mert's among them. Then Boone's. Then Eli's. She knows you now, Boone said. Eli stepped forward again, but Silas grabbed his arm. I'm not letting you go out like that. We're getting out of here. Now. There's no out, Eli said. She's out. Everywhere. She's the dust in the wind. The heat in the canyon. The song in the silence. Silas's grip tightened, but his hands trembled. Then we kill her. You can't kill a dream, Boone replied. Especially not one the desert's been dreaming for centuries. The stone circle pulsed once more. Brighter. Sharper. The sound wasn't a hum anymore. It was music, if you could call it that. Low tones, high warbles, something that bypassed the ears and burrowed straight into the chest. Silas swung the torch and threw it into the pit. Flames roared, but only for a moment. Then silence. The creature recoiled, not in pain, in interest, like it had just learned something new. It slithered backward slightly. The torch vanished into the black, swallowed whole. Boone tilted his head. She's almost here. Eli's mind raced. Why now? Why them? Why here? The answer came in a whisper he didn't recognize as his own voice. Because someone always listens. And he had listened. Every time the stone called. Every time the wind sang. She's been whispering to riders for years, Eli muttered. That's why we ride so far. So long. We're chasing her voice. Boone nodded once, almost proudly. And now you've caught it. The creature slithered forward again. This time, it moved with purpose. Eli reached for his saddlebag slowly. Silas noticed and shook his head, but Eli ignored him. His fingers found the stone. It burned through the cloth, burned into his skin. But he didn't let go. You want the key? He whispered to the black shape in front of him. You want to finish this? The air bent inward. A soundless agreement. Eli stood, stone in hand, and stepped toward the edge of the pit. Boone watched, smiling like a proud parent. But Eli didn't throw the stone in. He jumped. Of all the ways Eli thought this might end, jumping into the pit had never been one of them. And yet, there he was, falling, not through space exactly, but through something thicker, slower, like time had forgotten how to tick. The light above disappeared almost instantly, swallowed up by blackness that had a weight to it. It pressed in on him from every direction, like he wasn't so much falling as being absorbed. The stone in his hand pulsed harder, faster, hotter. Not just heat, memories, his, Boone's, others he didn't recognize. A child crying in a one-room cabin. A cowboy dying alone in the snow. A woman singing beside a campfire. Thousands of lives, one after another, flashing across his mind like someone flipping through pages of an old journal, too fast to understand but slow enough to feel. And then, silence. Stillness. Eli opened his eyes and realized he was standing. Not falling anymore. Not anywhere he could name, either. No walls. No ceiling. No floor he could see. But he wasn't sinking. The space around him shimmered faintly, like smoke floating in moonlight. Shapes moved just beyond the edge of vision. Too quick to track, too familiar to ignore. He wasn't alone. A voice whispered, low, melodic, and ancient. You brought it back. He turned. There wasn't a figure exactly, just a form, human-shaped, but shifting. Sometimes it looked like his mother. Then it changed into Boone. Then Silas. Then Mert. A kaleidoscope of faces he knew and ones he didn't, cycling like a wheel. You're not real, Eli said, his voice thin in the space. Neither are you, the voice answered gently. Not here. Here, you're only what you remember being. The stone in his hand was gone now. Or maybe it had melted into him. He couldn't tell, but he could still feel it, humming in his bones, whispering in the space behind his thoughts. You've touched what others only dream of, the voice continued. The hunger beneath the dust. The memory before man. Eli took a shaky step forward. What is this place? A crossroads, the voice said. A door between what was and what could be. He frowned. Why me? Because you listened. And somehow, that answer made sense. He had listened all along. To the wind in the canyons. The silence between hoofbeats. The tension in Boone's voice. The story hidden in every stone they dug up. He didn't just hear it. He felt it. So what now? He asked. A pause. Then, you carry it. Eli blinked. What? You carry the memory. You carry the hunger. You carry the silence. You are the witness. No, Eli said, backing up. I didn't come here to become some kind of ghost. You were never meant to stay, the voice said. None of them stayed. Not Boone. Not the others. They listened too long. Let the song soak into their bones. Then let me go, Eli said, his voice hardening. Only if you take it with you. He didn't know what that meant, but he nodded anyway. The space around him shivered again. The floor, or what passed for one, began to crack beneath his feet. A hum rose in the distance, like the sound of wind through dead branches. Remember, the voice said one last time. And don't stop listening. Then everything shattered. Colors exploded in his vision. Heat and cold hit him at once. And just like that, he was falling again. He hit solid ground with a jolt so hard it knocked the air out of his lungs. Eli, a voice shouted. It was Silas. Eli blinked against the torchlight. He was back in the chamber, back on the rock floor, staring up at Silas's wide-eyed face. The creature was gone. Boone was gone. The circle was gone too. Nothing left but a ring of scorched stone and dust. Silas helped him sit up. You scared the hell out of me. I jumped, Eli croaked. No kidding, Silas muttered. Thought you were gone. You fell right into that pit and just disappeared. Eli looked down at his hands. They were shaking. Something was different. Something had changed inside him, but he couldn't name it. Couldn't explain it. Where's Boone? He asked. Silas looked around. Gone. Just gone. Whatever that thing was took him, I guess. Or maybe he was already gone. The silence in the chamber was strange now. Not empty, but listening. Eli could feel it. They made their way out of the tunnels slowly. The storm above had passed, leaving only broken clouds and a sky full of stars. The horses were still there, nervous but alive. The campfire had burned out, leaving glowing coals and an eerie quiet. They rode in silence for miles. Neither of them had the words yet, and some things didn't need saying. When the sun began to rise over the canyon, painting the red cliffs in gold and blood, Eli finally spoke. She's still out there. Silas glanced over. That thing. No, Eli said quietly. The voice. The hunger. The story. Silas said nothing for a long time. Then, you brought something back with you, didn't you? Eli nodded. Yeah. Silas didn't ask what. He didn't want to know. The desert stretched out ahead of them, quiet and wide. Somewhere a hawk cried in the distance. The wind picked up, whispering softly through the rocks. Eli heard it. Not a warning this time. A welcome. But he didn't smile. Because deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Just as the morning light began to burn away the last shadows of the canyon, Eli and Silas rode toward what they hoped was safety. But the calm was fragile, like a thin crust over a boiling pot. Eli's mind was tangled in what he'd seen, what the voice had said, and what Boone's sudden disappearance meant. The weight of the unknown pressed down on him heavier than the saddle beneath him. Then Silas pulled up sharply. Wait, he whispered, his eyes scanning the horizon. Eli slowed his horse and squinted into the distance. At first, there was nothing but dust and the slow sway of desert grass. But then, something flickered, a shape moving where no shape should be. It's a rider, Silas said, narrowing his eyes. But not one of ours. The figure grew clearer, a lone horseman galloping hard across the plain. But something was off. The rider's posture was too rigid. The horse's pace too unnatural, almost mechanical. Eli's heart beat faster. Bandits? Or something worse? As they watched, the rider slowed and turned, heading straight for them. A chill ran down Eli's spine despite the heat. There was a coldness to the approach, a calculated, deliberate menace. When the rider was close enough, Eli saw the face beneath the wide-brimmed hat. It was a stranger. Pale skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, eyes like shards of ice. A faint smile twisted the man's lips, not friendly, but knowing. You're not from around here, the man said, voice low and steady. Silas shifted his weight, readying for trouble. And you're not welcome. The stranger laughed softly. I'm not here for trouble. At least, not yet. But you've stirred something deep in this land, something that was better left sleeping. Eli's pulse quickened. The words hit like a shot. Was this man tied to the voice? To the hunger? To the stone that pulsed inside him? You don't understand, Eli said, voice rough. We didn't want any of this. We're just trying to survive. The stranger's eyes gleamed. Survival comes with a price, cowboy. You've brought back a secret that binds the past and present, one that can't be unmade. Before either Eli or Silas could respond, the man lifted his hand. The air seemed to ripple, and a faint glow surrounded him. Then, with a sharp gesture, the ground near their horses erupted, sharp stones bursting from the earth like jagged teeth. Silas barely pulled his horse back in time, but Eli wasn't so lucky. His horse stumbled, and the reins slipped through his fingers. The animal bolted, disappearing into the brush. Eli's breath caught. Without his horse, the vast desert would swallow him whole. The stranger advanced. I suggest you reconsider your path. The land remembers everything, Cowboy, and now it's watching you. Eli's eyes scanned the horizon desperately. Where was Boone? Where was the stone's power? He needed answers, and fast. The stranger's smile deepened. You think the worst is over? You've only just begun to understand the weight of the past. The trail you're on is lined with ghosts, and they don't rest easy. With that, the rider turned and vanished into the morning haze, leaving behind a silence that felt like a trap. Eli and Silas exchanged a grim look. The stakes had just shifted. The mysteries of long rides, bandits, and rotten food were no longer just tales of survival. They were threads in a far greater web, one that threatened to unravel everything Eli thought he knew. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying secrets and warnings alike. Eli clenched his fists, knowing one thing for sure. The journey ahead would demand more than grit and courage. It would demand a reckoning with the shadows that had been waiting all along. Eli stood still, dust in his teeth and the sting of grit in his eyes, staring at the place where the stranger had disappeared. The words echoed louder than the desert wind. The land remembers. Silas glanced at him, eyes asking a question neither of them could answer yet. They both knew something had shifted, deep and permanent. The world around them wasn't just open land and old bandit trails anymore. It was haunted, somehow awake. They pushed on by foot, Eli now walking with every ounce of his strength dragging behind. Silas gave up his horse after a few miles, tethering it and walking alongside him. No one spoke for a long while. The air felt heavier with each mile, and the silence between them was louder than gunfire. The sun climbed high, then began to fall again. By dusk, the sky turned copper, and the wind carried a different scent, wet earth like rain long overdue. Finally, just as Eli's legs buckled beneath him, they reached it. The stone outcropping Boone had described, dark gray and oddly smooth, like it had been burned or frozen centuries ago. A circle of standing rocks loomed around it, ancient and broken in places, with moss growing where the sun rarely hit. Silas held back. This is it, isn't it? Eli didn't answer. He stepped into the circle. The closer he got to the center, the louder the hum grew in his chest, low, like thunder before a storm. He pulled the smooth black stone from his pocket, the one that had pulsed every night since he found it in Boone's saddlebag. It now felt alive, warmer than his own skin, vibrating faintly like it had something left to say. The wind howled through the stone circle. A flash of light burst from the center rock, nearly blinding him. Eli fell back, but the stone in his hand pulled forward like magnet to magnet. The hum became a roar. The ground trembled. Silas shouted his name, but Eli couldn't respond. Something deep in the rock had awakened, and it was reaching out. Suddenly, Boone's voice, clear and close, spoke from behind. You made it. Eli turned in disbelief. Boone stood there, dusty but unharmed, looking older somehow, eyes shadowed. Where the hell have you been? Eli shouted over the wind. I followed the trail to its end, Boone said. And it showed me things buried before cowboys, before bandits, before any of us rode these lands. That stone in your hand? It's not just a relic. It's a key. Eli's stomach turned. A key to what? To memory, Boone said. To the truth. This land, it remembers everything. The fights, the lies, the betrayals, the lost souls. And if you wake it up, it doesn't forget. It judges. A loud crack split the air. The center of the stone ring broke open, revealing a pit. Not deep, but black as night and pulsing like a heartbeat. Eli backed away instinctively. What do we do? Boone stepped forward, calm as ever. You came here to survive, Eli. But survival ain't just about outrunning bandits or choking down spoiled beans. Sometimes it's about looking something ancient in the eye and deciding who you really are. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out the other half of the black stone. You had it all along, Silas said. Boone nodded. We each carry a piece, but only one of us chooses how it ends. Eli looked down at the stone in his hand. It was glowing now, brighter and faster, almost frantic. His pulse raced with it. The pit in the earth called to him, but he didn't know why. He didn't know what would happen if he stepped into it, or dropped the stone, or refused. He looked at Boone. You said we stirred something up. What if we let it rest? Boone's face darkened. It's too late for that. You started something, and now you finish it. The wind cut off. Dead silence. Then Eli made his choice. He stepped forward, heart pounding, and dropped the stone into the pit. A blinding flash exploded from the earth. The wind screamed back to life. The circle of stones lit up like fire, and for a second, time felt frozen. Eli saw flashes, not just of his life, but of lives before him. Cowboys riding across deserts, stealing, surviving, dying. People betrayed, people avenged. Families built and broken. The land held it all, and just as suddenly, it ended. The stones cooled. The light faded. The hum died. Silas helped him to his feet. What the hell just happened? Boone stared at the pit, now sealed like it had never been there. You did it, he said quietly. You gave it back what it needed. Eli wiped the sweat from his brow. And what was that? Boone looked at him, somber. A choice. They left the circle behind, walking under the stars. The desert stretched out again like it always had, dusty, quiet, endless. But Eli felt different. The weight in his chest had lifted. The stone was gone, but its memory lingered. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, he didn't need to. Then, just before dawn, Boone stopped riding. What's wrong? Silas asked. Boone turned slowly, his eyes on the horizon. That pit didn't seal itself. Eli followed his gaze. Far off in the distance, a flicker of light, small and constant, burned in a place no fire should be. And with it, the faint sound of hooves, but no riders in sight. The sun was barely peeking over the far edge of the horizon, casting a gold and rose tint over the open land. The chill of night hadn't yet lifted, and the stillness after the storm of light and memory made the desert feel unfamiliar. Eli, Boone, and Silas stood there, quiet, watching that strange flicker in the distance. None of them spoke right away. There was nothing left to say, not yet. Their minds were still racing, piecing together what they'd seen, what they'd felt. The ground beneath their boots no longer felt like just dirt. It felt like something alive, aware, maybe even waiting. Silas finally broke the silence. You think it's over? Boone didn't answer at first. His eyes were locked on the glow, far off and low, steady as a heartbeat. After a pause, he sighed. I think it never ends. Not really. We just walk the same circles again and again. Some men run from it. Some face it. Eli looked down at his hands. They were still shaking slightly. He couldn't forget what he'd seen when he dropped that stone into the pit. Visions of 1,000 cowboys riding, fighting, falling. People lost, people left behind. He realized it hadn't just been about him. It had been about everyone who had ever passed through this land. Bandits, ranchers, drifters, traders, even children. All trying to carve something out of a land that didn't promise anything in return. But the strangest part was what he hadn't seen. He hadn't seen the future, just the past. As if the land didn't care where they were going, only where they'd been. They rode slow that morning, heading back the way they came. No one rushed. There was a peace to the silence now, something sacred about not filling it. Boone led for a while, then fell back to let Silas take the lead. Eli stayed in the middle, watching both of them, quietly studying the men who had become something like family without ever saying it aloud. They passed the old wagon trail where they'd first found that broken-down cart, where the storm had pushed them off course. It looked normal again, just dry earth and scattered brush. But Eli knew better now. Every broken trail had its story, every pile of bones a name, a face, a cry lost in the wind. They stopped for water at a stream that ran clearer than it had on their way in. Boone leaned against a stone, the same tired look in his eyes, but softer somehow. You know, he said, I used to think survival was just about grit. Muscling through, keeping your boots on, never backing down. But it's more than that. It's knowing when to let go, when to stop carrying the things that weigh you down. Silas smirked. You saying we're getting soft? Boone shrugged. I'm saying we finally understand what it means to last. Eli took a long drink from his canteen. The water was cold, clean. Do you think anyone else ever found that place before us? He asked. Boone looked thoughtful. Maybe. Maybe they didn't make it back to talk about it. Or maybe they did, and no one believed him. They all shared a quiet laugh at that because it was true. Who would believe what they'd seen? A pit in the desert that hummed with memory? Stones that glowed with judgment? It sounded like a fever dream from too much sun and not enough food. But they knew the truth. They'd felt it in their bones. As the sun climbed higher, they found themselves back near the old ranch post, now abandoned and silent. Eli slowed his horse, staring at the sagging beams and broken windows. This was where they'd first learned that the trail ahead was cursed. Where they'd found that boy's journal, and Boone had gone missing. So much had changed since then. Boone climbed down from his horse and walked toward the edge of the property. There was a patch of wildflowers growing now, yellow and tough, pushing up through cracked earth. Funny, he said. Even in the worst places, something still grows. Eli dismounted too, walked up beside him. So what now? Boone shrugged, looking out over the land. We ride. We keep moving. There's always another town, another fire to put out, another hand to lend. Cowboys don't stop just because they're tired, Silas added. And if that light in the desert ever grows brighter again? Boone looked at him. Then someone else will have to make a choice. But maybe now, they'll be better prepared. The ride back into known territory took them another 2 days. Along the way, they helped a stranded rancher fix his wagon wheel, shared a meal with an older couple heading west, and passed a group of young riders looking to stake a claim on their own land. It felt like the world was moving again, as if their encounter with the ancient past had cleared something in the present. Eli thought about that stone circle often. He wondered if it was still there, if someone else might stumble across it one day, feeling lost, desperate for answers. Maybe they'd hear the hum too. Maybe they'd be asked to make a choice. When they reached the edge of the town, just before the main road dipped toward the saloon, Boone pulled up his horse and turned back to them. This is where I ride on, he said. Got some loose Insatai and Carson Bluff, and a man I owe an apology to. Eli looked surprised. You're not staying? Boone grinned faintly. I don't stay anywhere long. You know that. Silas held out his hand. You'll find us again? Boone shook it. Always do. He turned and rode off, slow and steady, like a man who finally understood something deeper about the land he'd been riding for years. Eli and Silas rode into town together. The streets were busy, horses tied to posts, voices carrying from windows and porches. Life, as it always did, had moved on, but Eli felt grounded now in a way he hadn't before. He walked taller, breathed easier. That night, lying on the porch of an old bunkhouse under the open stars, Eli looked up at the sky and listened to the wind. It carried the same dry breath as before, but he no longer feared what it whispered. He thought about survival, not just in the sense of eating bad beans or fending off wild bandits, but in carrying the weight of memory, choosing kindness when it's hard, and facing things most men run from. And somewhere out there, far past the hills and riverbeds, the land still remembered. But now it remembered them too. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.